Hello and welcome. My name is Caleb Britt and I'm currently a student at the College of Coastal Georgia, which is located in Glynn County, Georgia. Glynn County is tucked midway between Savannah, Georgia and Jacksonville, Florida. Glynn County is truly a wonderful place to live and is steeped in rich history. Being one of the 8 original counties in the state, home to the second oldest school in Georgia and the place where the Federal Reserve was created. Tourists come from around the world to enjoy our endless summers, picture-perfect beaches, and southern hospitality. But Glynn County is also known for something not quite as picturesque. It is the home of 4 Superfund sites, or a designated area that is contaminated with hazardous waste. The first time I heard of a Superfund site was in 2018. Glynn County was going to build a new school next to one of these sites, and as you can imagine, there was outrage. I found the controversy interesting, but didn't look into it any further. However, recently a school project provided me with an opportunity to get a grade for indulging in my curiosity. As you may have guessed, I sat down on a computer in my school library, typed Superfund sites, Glynn County. Images of local areas being fenced off and signs with big, red, scary letters reading, "Caution, do not enter, US EPA Superfund site." And the consumption advisories regarding the fish in our local rivers filled my screen. A consumption advisory means you really shouldn't eat the fish, but if you do, don't eat a lot or you'll get sick, which I found a little concerning because I see people fishing off these bridges here frequently. Truth be told, I expected to find that really smart people had figured all this stuff out, and I could simply make a short presentation saying that we should make a point to stay on top of this. And then go into my holiday break, counting down till 2020 was behind me, like everyone else. Unfortunately, what I found was this is a very real problem, and it's only getting worse. The EPA estimates that at least 40 million metric tons of toxic and hazardous waste are being released into the environment each year, and there are 36,000 seriously contaminated sites in the U.S. However, the U.S. General Accounting Office says it could be as much as 400,000 sites. Most of these sites disproportionately affect people based on class, race, and education. The fact that this issue affects the most vulnerable of our communities struck me as it became clear to me that the people I see fishing out of these rivers every day had an impossible choice to make. Eat today and maybe get sick later, or not eat today. Obviously, I wanted to help, but how? Which brings me to the subject of my presentation. I wanted to provide a concise and easy to understand presentation on how hazardous waste affects our communities, how to locate the Superfund sites and current hazardous waste producers, and how to advocate for remediation and reuse while mitigating exposures and protecting our families, communities, and the environment without demonizing businesses and corporations. Toxic and hazardous waste, those are frightening terms to say the least. They foster images of growing green ooze that turn turtles into teenage mutant ninjas. While their effects aren't that dramatic, they still can cause a host of problems, so let's define them. Hazardous waste, or any discarded liquid or solid that contains substances known to be toxic or poisonous, carcinogenic, meaning they have the potential to cause cancer, mutagenic, or capable of inducing genetic mutation, and therogenic, these agents that cause birth defects in humans and other life forms. As you can see, the very definition hazardous waste has devastating effects on a community for generations. The evidence points to higher rates of cancer, miscarriage and birth defects, behavioral issues thought to be a result of disruptions to the nervous system. But when it comes to how hazardous waste affects our health, the environment, what we don't know is more terrifying than what we do know. The studies are limited due to the fact that the exposure is usually small doses over a long period of time. Given the period of time, you introduce too many contributing factors. But what we do know is risk equals chemical plus exposure. Locally, we need to look to our community planners and engineers to mitigate exposure. For example, here in Glynn County, we have built a jail and a school on these sites. This is where being aware of these sites can make a difference. Next, a little history on Superfund sites and how to identify them in your community. In the late 1970s, the public started to become aware of these risks to human health and the environment posed by these sites, where hazardous waste had been improperly managed. These sites include manufacturing plants, milling locations, and landfills. In response, Congress established the Comprehensive Environmental Response, Compensation, and Liability Act, or generally known as Superfund, in 1980. Essentially, the law established a tax on chemical and petroleum industries and extensive federal oversight on hazardous substances that may endanger public health or the environment. The law set up long-term remedial actions of these sites, and the list became known as the National Priority List, or the NPL. There are currently 16 sites in the state of Georgia, with 5 being removed as a result of being cleaned up. The list can be found on the EPA website and also gives information on what has been done, current status, site documents, and data. Now, how to locate current hazardous waste producers. In 1986, Congress passed the Emergency Planning and Community Right to Know Act as a result of a serious chemical exposure in West Virginia. This law created what's known as the Toxic Release Inventory, which also can be found on the EPA website. The Toxic Release Inventory requires over 20,000 manufacturing facilities to report on the release of over 700 individual chemicals. A release of a chemical means that it is emitted into the air or water, or is placed in some type of land disposal. Okay, so far we have discussed how hazardous waste affects our communities, particularly the most vulnerable, and how to locate former and current producers. Lastly, let's look on how to move forward. Unfortunately, today I will not be able to provide you with a cure-all to hazardous waste. I would like to simply suggest a measured approach to meet this important challenge we face. Given the amount of these sites and the fact that we need industry to meet our wants and needs, we cannot simply fence them off and close businesses. This is a multifaceted issue that includes input from professionals in health organizations, community planning, engineering, environmental science, and government. We need not blame businesses and manufacturing plants, but bring them to the table to tackle this issue that affects us all. Total costs for hazardous waste cleanup in the U.S. are estimated between $370 billion and $1.7 trillion of taxpayer money, with most Superfund money initially spent on consultants, lawyers, rather than the cleanup. The original Superfund Act included a polluter's pay tax, which Congress let lapse in 1995. This tax made the responsible party pay for the cleanup. We've seen forms of this used in the international community with great success. As of now, that $370 billion to $1.7 trillion mentioned earlier is coming from taxpayers. I will provide a link to the EPA website that explores various economic incentives for businesses to become partners and working together to mitigate the effects of hazardous waste. I realize that I may have left you with more questions today than answers. And the truth is, answers regarding this topic are hard to find. But I have provided resources for locating these sites and possible economic solutions that are viable options that work in our capitalist system. Given the fact that hazardous waste can have dire consequences on a community for generations, let's start asking questions and demanding answers of our elected officials and business community regarding hazardous waste and its disposal. As Einstein said, those who have the privilege to know have the duty to act, and we must act. We simply must.